queers will attach themselves to anything.
They really, it was 2005 was a dark time. Hi, and welcome to the Gifted Child Symposium, a podcast for people who were a pleasure to have in class. I'm Felicia.
And I'm Eugene.
This week, we're going to be discussing shipping, and I don't mean via FedEx or the Royal Mail. I mean the verb shipping as defined by Urban Dictionary as a verb used to describe the action of wishing for two people to enter a relationship, whether romantic or occasionally platonic, in books, movies, TV shows, or real life.
So, just like a quick history on shipping, because it's the core of fangirl and fan culture, and it started as such. The term, specifically shipping, originated from the fans of the X-Files in the 90s, who were very, very passionate believers that the main characters, Scully and Mulder, belonged together in a romantic relationship. So they started calling themselves relationshippers, later being shortened into R-shippers or eventually shippers. The practice, however, is as old as fiction. Like, we can interpret any writings, like from Shakespeare to Socrates, as attempts to ship characters together.
Yeah, the only thing I learned from our English degree is that Shakespeare did not write a single thing that was original.
Yeah, exactly. Like, obviously it is incredibly, shipping is incredibly linked with fan fiction in ways that we will talk about and ways that we won't, because that's a separate episode. But just like the wish fulfillment of wanting the books you read or the myths you know to be a certain way is just as old as storytelling. Actually, from Star Trek, Spock and Kirk created slash, which predates the term shipping, but it's kind of the same thing. Slash was a term that used to be specifically to refer to gay ships, in the way that, so if you ever read fanfiction, it's kind of like written down, it will be like character A slash character B. That slash kind of symbolizes like a romantic involvement. But it later became just kind of like wider to any sort of ship, like straight, gay, anything. Xena, the Warrior Princess, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer are also credited to popularizing femme-slash, which, as the name suggests, is just slash, but female and queer.
The Willows.
Exactly. So, as you can tell, even though like the term comes from like a straight ship, based on this history and us being sitting on this table, most shipping is gay. Like, that's just kind of like a fact. If you meet most people who are shippers and are fangirls, most of them either identify as queer or ship queer couples. So in this survey from Fansplaining, it's called the Fansplaining Shipping Survey, from 2019, that surveyed nearly 20,000 people who identified as shippers. 72% of those people identified as women, and more than half of them identified as queer in some way, most of which identified specifically as bisexual, pansexual, around 43%. So shipping is an inherently queer thing, and I think that's very, very important to kind of talk about it from the get-go, and I think that's how we either encountered it or became very passionate as shippers, you and I.
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I did ship a few straight ships back in the day.
This is a safe space.
Thank you. I'm very brave. Like, I shipped, like, I don't know, Gale and Katniss back in the day. But I will say, I was very much introduced to fanfiction, shipping, fandom culture through straight ships, and then very, very quickly found the non-straight ships, and usually the non-canonical ships. So, like, if anything, straight shipping is like a gateway into gay shipping. In my experience, anyway.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. And I think it's a very queer thing to do, because I also shipped hella straight couples. But it's a weird thing, because in my brain I don't think of them as shipping. Like, I think of them as like, I really used to read a lot of fan fiction that was like Twilight fan fiction, but was I shipping? Like, to me I was just like, I like that couple. But the passionate, obsessive shipping was, I think, exclusively queer in my experience. And I think that's kind of the difference. Is like, oh, is it straight and cute and mostly canon? Then I'm probably just enjoying it. But is it like breadcrumbs of a potential encounter that make me obsessed and become a hyperfixation, then it's queer, and that's shipping to me.
Yeah, like when we were like, when I was like actively watching some of the shows we're going to discuss, it wasn't the straight ships that was keeping me going. I would be on the floor crying because of the queer ships. So just a disclaimer before we get into it, we're only going to be talking about fictional ships, so ships from books, movies, and TV shows. So we're not going to be discussing real people or celebrities, although we're well aware that that is a thing.
Yes.
We're also going to be briefly touching on fanfiction, but the episode is mostly focused on shipping specifically. Fanfiction is probably going to be reserved for another episode. So basically what we're going to be doing in this episode is looking at shipping as literary criticism, which definitely is more feasible when we focus our discussion on fictional works instead of real life people.
Exactly.
That would be really weird. So yeah, we're gonna be putting our big fancy English degrees to use by looking at shipping within fictional stories through the framing of Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author. The Death of the Author is a 1967 essay by French literary critic Roland Barthes. Very brief history on this essay. It's really famous if you did an English degree, if you did a philosophy degree, if you've looked at basic literary criticism, you will probably have come across this term and this critic before. It was kind of reaction to formalism, and up till, that time period, so the 60s, 50s, people would usually read literature and analyze literature through a strong historical lens, and usually would try and discern meaning behind literary text via the author's biography or, the theorized author's intentions. But to put it very simply, in this essay, Barthes argues that any work of literature or text is fundamentally divorced from the author who made it. So he theorizes that the place in which all meaning of a text can be derived from is the reader. So he writes, "The reader is the space on which all the quotations that make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin, but in its destination." There's a lot of issues with this framework, which has been debated for decades by people much smarter and more qualified than us. For example, like one of the pitfalls of this theory is sort of the notion of the perfect reader. Barthes' sort of solution to the death of the author. So his sort of answer to literary criticism is that the reader is like sort of the place in which all meaning and unity and whatever can be found, but it kind of relies on the reader themselves being a sort of perfect blank slate. But obviously that is not possible because every reader is going to have a different reaction to a text because criticism is subjective. And then the other issue, which is probably the one you've heard more about, has been really, really relevant over the last few years, is the moral issue of separating the art from the artist. But we're not here to argue for or against Barthes. We're just here to argue that shipping is an example of the application of this theory. If you're interested in the actual theory and a more in-depth analysis of the sort of pros and cons of it, and also sort of like more detailed examples of like modern applications of Death of the Author, I would really recommend Lindsay Ellis's YouTube video essay called The Death of the Author. She talks to John Green, who has very vocally spoken out against sort of revealing what happens to his characters after the end of his books. So she actually interviews him in this video essay because he has been known to say that books belong to their readers, which is the same thing as Death of the Author as far as I can tell.
And in the whole, like, even though belonging might not seem like the most, like, the strongest word to use, I think it kind of, like the notion of a book belongs to the reader, not the author, signals at this idea of authority that is in The Death of the Author and in shipping, both. Like, this kind of idea of, like, the ultimate authority on what's right and what's wrong isn't Big Daddy author anymore, or showrunner, or screenwriter, or whoever. It's actually giving to the reader or the shipper. And that is really interesting, specifically when you think about who are the shippers mostly. We just said that most of them are like identify as women, most of them identify as queer. A lot of the times is like, in our case, when we started, like we were really young and probably didn't have that much like sexual or romantic experience, and it was like a place where we could have like authority over things we really, really loved and explore like our own lives in the abstract. So I think that's like a lot of the value of taking the death of the author and applying it to shipping, because the death of the author is kind of this movement of power, this removal of power from the artist into the people who receive it. This kind of back and forth of authority and power between the reader and the writer and the showrunner and the shipper is probably the most vivid in queerbaiting, or in the phenomenon of queerbaiting.
Yes.
So there's a lot of scholarship in queerbaiting. It's a really interesting, albeit frustrating and sad experience, but it's a very interesting topic. And there's a lot of scholarship in it. There's a very famous essay called Moriarty's Ghost, or The Queer Disruption of BBC Sherlock, by Judith Fathala. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So she defines queerbaiting as, and I quote, a strategy by which writers and networks attempt to gain the attention of queer viewers via hints, jokes, gestures, and symbolism, suggesting a queer relationship between two characters, and then emphatically denying and laughing off the possibility. Denial and mockery reinstate a heteronormative narrative that poses no danger of offending mainstream viewers at the expense of queer eyes. End quote. So plenty of shows, books, and like content in general are quite guilty of this, or at least accused of it. What is particularly frustrating and damaging about queerbaiting is that it takes advantage of queer fans and our thirst for representation, hinting at queer relationships enough to keep us watching and spending money on these shows or these films or these books, but never actually fulfilling these ships. And I think that's what I mean with authority and power, because as much as you can ship a couple, you're still kind of like strung along by Big Daddy author. You're still wanting their confirmation about the validity of your ship. And no matter how much you, like, how much power you have in these ships, you are like extrapolating these hints and stuff, thinking like you are rewriting the work. But in actuality, they're the ones leaving these kind of breadcrumbs of representation so you can keep watching. So it also makes queer ships appear almost imaginary, because they're never confirmed. They're never confirmed by the narratives or the authors. So when they don't happen, producers and writers can always blame the queer viewers, because it's like, you know, our own conjectures and imagination. So if we are disappointed by a ship not happening, it's because we made it up and it never existed. There's also a great article on queerbaiting called Queerbaiting, Betrayal, and the Quest for Better Representation by a writer with the alias of Stitch, who I think explains really well that queerbaiting, quote, dangles representation above fans' heads and makes them hope for a vision of something that they might not actually get with that piece of media or celebrity's personal life, something that is often denied to them in their own lives, a happy ending, end quote. And I think that's a good way to start our case studies, because as much as shipping is powerful and queerbaiting is frustrating, I think what we hyperfixate is the denial of a happy ending for our ships and ourselves.
So let's dive into our own shipping histories. We've each picked a case study from our pasts and presents, let's be real. So my example, my ship that I will, what's the quote? I will go down with this ship is from Supernatural. Let me preface this by saying that I was a proud member of the Holy Trio, the Super Hulock fandom, from around 2011 to 2016, and indeed, as every Supernatural viewer on Tumblr did, I shipped Destiel. For those of you who don't know, Supernatural was a show on the CW that ran for 15 seasons. Oh, God. 15, I said that correctly, with the final season airing in late 2020. It follows the Winchester brothers, Sam and Dean, who are both monster hunters, and they road trip around the US tracking down supernatural creatures. And in the beginning, this show was kind of like a very standard monster of the week sort of thing, with sort of Americana folkloric demons. But around season 3, I believe, they started introducing a lot of reimagined Christian theology, and the show sort of spirals from there. And it would take way too long to explain it, in even like fractionally. God is named Chuck in the universe, and in one season, I think the final season, Sam and Dean need to kill Chuck, aka kill God. A taste, if you will, of the madness that is Supernatural. 15 seasons.
Yeah, you gotta make shit up to keep that running. And you gotta queerbait hard to keep that running.
And that's the thing, right? Like, yes, the show escalates, sort of plot-wise, but it escalated so much harder ship-wise as well, specifically for Destiel, which is the most popular ship in this fandom, which is Destiel, which is a portmanteau of Dean, one of the Winchester brothers, and Castiel, an angel of the Lord. Supernatural is not exactly a woke show. It suffers from a lack of representation, a lot of sort of examples of bury your gays, and is overall like sort of wildly unrepresentative of its very queer fandom. I think the actual target audience for the show is sort of, I don't know, like
straight Christians,
dads.
Yeah,
like honestly, like the first few seasons, it really targets itself towards like, I don't know, men in their 30s, let's say. People who listen to country music or classic rock exclusively, and they only drink bourbon.
Queers will attach themselves to anything.
They really, it was 2005 was a dark time. But yeah, the show isn't conducive to the insanely queer audience again, but thank you, Tumblr, for queering basically anything. But that's not to say that the showrunners were unaware of the fandom. They would, like, the fandom got really, really big. Like, they were kind of, like, the main heavy hitters at, like, Comic-Con and, like, whatever. Like, you know, it wasn't that the showrunners were unaware that most of their audience was queer teenage girls. And also, there's a good example of, like, how the showrunners actually use the fandom to their advantage. There's an episode in season 10 called Fan Fiction, in which Sam and Dean happen upon a school production, like a school musical adaptation of quote-unquote Supernatural. And in this production, Dean and Castiel are like romantically involved, and Castiel has a song in which he talks about, like, he sings about how lonely he is without Dean, like how he's like, he wishes Dean would pay him attention like for once in his life. And in the episode, the two teen actors playing Dean and Castiel are in a romantic relationship. It's so on the nose. They were fully aware.
So is that episode mocking of the fan fiction, or is it just acknowledging it? Because it's not validating it, is it?
No, it is kind of like what you were saying, in that it's kind of dangling this thing in front of the fans and being like, ooh, we know you want this, we know you love this, but literally parodying it in their show instead of just giving the fans what they wanted. It's really cruel. I will say, though, the songs in that episode slap. Like, they like, I would watch a full musical of that. Like, it was so cute. And they did a beautiful slowed down version of Carry On Wayward Son, which is a very meaningful song to the show. But anyway, the point is, they were clear, like, the showrunners were clearly well aware of the fandom and sort of what the fandom was begging for. But for 10 years, fans of the show were just sort of left hanging. And even, like, the actors, like, hey, the other sort of side to this is that the actors are also incredibly straight, and they, I think, a lot of the time felt quite uncomfortable with how queer the ships were in this fandom. And also, I will say, one of the ships that got really, really big in this fandom is called Wincest, which is the two Winchester brothers, which I think is a valid thing for the actors to feel uncomfortable about.
We do not approve of incest in this house.
I just don't. If that's your thing, good for you, but why?
Go watch Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Literally, George R. R. Martin will give it to you. Anyway, the Supernatural fandom is so active. It still is, honestly, but like back in the day especially, there were hundreds of thousands of GIF sets and scene packs and whatever featuring different Cass and Dean interactions proving their chemistry and love. And I will also say, there aren't actually that many interactions between these two characters. Okay, full disclosure, I watched until season 11, so I haven't seen the last 4 seasons, so I'm not sure about if this applies to the last 4 seasons, but for the first 11 seasons anyway that Castiel is in, there aren't that many interactions, simply because Castiel is an angel of the Lord and he's like busy doing other stuff, so they don't actually hang out that often. But there's a lot of evidence for their chemistry, and it was like, no matter what the show did, like, these two characters were just sort of destined to be together for the fandom. Dean is like aggressively straight in the show. He's like he's like a playboy. He's constantly hitting on women. He like loves beer and sandwiches. Like he's such like a straight dude. And Castiel is an angel of the Lord. Like he's not supposed to be a sexual being. He had sex like once in the show and it was a whole thing. Like it was really like a really bizarre episode. Anyway. But yeah, he's like genuinely very absent from the show, despite him being part of the main cast. That's the backgrounder. Cut to November 5th, 2020, when Tumblr exploded because season 15, episode 18 aired. And as Castiel was about to die, he confessed to his love for Dean. And then Castiel immediately got sent to a hell dimension called the Empty, but the fandom have dubbed it Turbo Hell. There's a lot of memes about how in Supernatural gays go to Turbo Hell, but Dean's car, a 1967 Chevy Impala, which he calls Baby, goes with Dean to Turbo Heaven.
So it's literally bury your gays. Like
it was like he came out, he confessed his love, and then immediately died.
Before you get into the rest, what? Like, did they have to do that? Like, if they had left the ship unsaid and the character just faced his death, it would have been heartbreaking and it would have still been queer baited, but it wouldn't have been a hate crime? Like, did they need to do that?
So unclear. Like, again, I stopped watching season 11, so I've missed like 3.5 seasons of Supernatural, so I don't know what happened at the time, but I highly doubt that they confirmed the ship in that time, basically. Like, I just don't think that this was any more out of the blue for me as it was for anyone else who did watch the whole show, because Tumblr exploded for a reason. Like, people were not seeing that coming. Yeah, like, it seems like a weird sort of like half-assed attempt to appease the fandom while still maintaining Dean is straight forever.
I don't know if that's representation or a fuck you.
Right? It feels really like a slap in the face. Like, you know, like they could have just gone out with whatever they were going for. Like, you know, the fans still loved the show.
Yeah.
Well, the fans still tolerated the show. But yeah, they really had to go in there and be like, gays go to hell.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
So, in this scene, right, Castiel dying says, I love you. In the English version, Dean does not reciprocate. But no one knows why. But in the Latin American dub, Dean reciprocates and says, I love you too. And, like, there's a lot of, like, people being like, oh, like, did he mean it platonically? But then, you know, in Spanish, he didn't say yo quiero. He said,
Amar.
Oh my God, what did he say? Yeah, like, he said...
Yeah, like, through the choice of words in Spanish, it's not a I like you, bro. It's an I love you romantically because of the use of the verb amar instead of querer. Indeed.
And no one knows why this happened. Like, so Misha Collins, who played Castiel in the show, posted a video on Twitter, now called X, in which he says, hi, I just wanted to take a moment to explain there is no conspiracy. There never was an alternate ending of episode 1518 when Cass said, I love you. Apparently, there was a rogue translator. So no one knows why the Latin American dubbers decided to inject Dean reciprocating, because that was clearly never in the original English script.
I like the idea of a rogue translator, a hero, but also, like, that's literally what we're talking about. Like, that rogue translator, not through fan fiction, not through fan theories, through genuine work, employed the power of the reader, the power of interpretation, and, like, put it in the wild. Like, I have not seen a single episode of Supernatural, but you told me this and I was just so proud. Like, whoever that rogue translator out there is, I hope you have a happy queer relationship. I hope you weren't fired for this, because this is amazing and this is the authority of the fandom.
100%. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you unnamed hero, you are loved by so many. And no matter what, though, Castiel still goes to Turbo Hell.
Yes.
Like, there is no happy ending for this couple. Which is all to say, like, I truly believe that the Supernatural fandom basically dug their own grave by how hard they shipped this ship. They shipped it right into Turbo Hell, because there's no way the writers and the actors would have shoehorned this random moment in without it being, like, the most delicious fan service. like in the final season of this 15 season show, they really said, we're going to give Castiel one gay moment and then condemn him to a literal biblical punishment for eternity.
Oh my god. You talking about Supernatural makes me so thankful for my case study, because I just researching about this case study made me really angry. But now that you explain Supernatural, I'm like, you know what? This is so much better. We will draw the comparisons in a second. But just to say, I am so sorry to all of the Supernatural shippers. That sounds awful.
Yeah.
I am so sorry. That is the worst queer baiting I've ever heard. And yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's like ridiculous. I mean, especially how they treated the other queer characters on the show. Which is to say, they killed them so fast.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, again, very different from my case study. So if I can move on to mine.
Yes, please do.
Unlike Supernatural, which I haven't seen a single episode of, when you described the ship, oh my god, what's the name of the ship? When you described the ship, I also thought it was Vincent. Like, I thought the main ship was the brothers. Like, I still don't really know much about Supernatural. But unlike Supernatural, you have seen the show.
I have seen Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, my case study is Once Upon a Time. I still love this show to death. Even though, kind of like Supernatural with you, out of the 7 seasons, I probably watched fully around 4. And then we watched the 7th season together. So I probably watched like...
Yes.
But even after like not watching like entirely, I would still like catch up with the plot. So I kind of know everything that happened, but I haven't seen every single episode of the last couple seasons. So anyway, Once Upon a Time was a show that aired between 2011 and 2018 on ABC. Which is, by the way, ABC Entertainment is owned by Disney. So it poses,
really important.
Yes, it poses the question of what would happen if our beloved fairy tale characters, who we know and love, kind of existed in our world or lived in our world. So it follows Emma Swan, a cynical and independent woman who, after the son she gave up for adoption as a baby shows up to her door, ends up in Storybrooke, Maine, a fictional town, where she slowly learns that she is meant to save the people in this town who are actually fairy tale characters, trapped in a world without magic by the evil queen. It is nonsense. It is like the multiverse of Grimm, but then you also add like anything Disney has ever owned. It is really weird, but I love it. And the main ships of the show, I mean, there were so many ships. There were so many characters. But the main ships of the show and the main ships that concerned this argument were around Emma herself as the protagonist. And he created a shipping war. So they were Swan Queen and Captain Swan. So Swan Queen is the ship between Emma Swan and Regina Mills, who's also the evil queen. And Emma is the daughter of Snow White, who is, again, the nemesis of the evil queen. So they meet because of Henry, Emma's biological son, who she gave up and then was adopted and raised by Regina by the start of the show. They start as enemies and then grow to become allies and eventually friends, and then they co-parent Henry throughout the rest of the show as Regina's kind of redemption arc and growth occurs. I personally love this ship so much, and I know the majority of the people who ship it for the same kind of reasons. That is, we have the typical enemies to friends to lovers trope, if they actually did become lovers. We also have just insane chemistry. Like, in the first season and a half-ish, there wasn't active shipping in the show. There was only kind of the story of the fairy tales. They only started introducing other characters as potential romantic companions in like season 2 and 3, especially for like Emma and Regina. So for the first season, you have these enemies who hate each other, who are against each other, but who also have to be in each other's company and in the same room because of their son and because of the plot, and they just have so much chemistry. And also, like, if this actually became true, you have like a lot of tropes of like found and chosen family, this beautiful connection as well, because Emma and Regina are quite lonely, cynical characters who, even in like season 5, you can still see like Emma and Regina are the only ones who understand each other in a lot of these places. Like, they do not have the inherent optimism of a lot of the fairy tale characters because of who they are. So that's why I love it. And there were other competing ships which were actually canon. One was Captain Swan, that is the ship between Captain Hook and Emma. The show's a lot. And Outlaw Queen, which involved Robin Hood and Regina. So both of these became canon and quickly took over Emma and Regina's narratives, to the anger of a lot of the shippers. This competition for which ship was better created a lot of animosity within the fandom, and some incidents with the cast too, which you haven't heard, and I'm really excited to explain. So
Yes, please.
For the for the ships themselves, like a lot of the times, like if you saw the discourse on like Tumblr or even in like fan conventions, like it was a lot of like straights versus gays in a really sad way, because the Swan Queen shippers like wanted to be visible. Like it was a lot of like queer women who wanted a ship that resembled them, and they thought that Outlaw Queen and Captain Swan were either just boring and straight or toxic in the case of Captain Swan. But then the straight shippers of these ships refused to acknowledge Swan Queen as like valid at all, because it wasn't canon, and a lot of the times it was also because it was a queer ship, and it was really sad. A lot of the times you see like videos of people like a Swan Queen shipper asking one of the at Comic-Con, like asking one of the cast members like, oh, what do you think of Swan Queen, or like what do you think of Emma and Regina, and it would be every straight Captain Swan shipper being like, oh, not again. Like it was really sad. It was really maddening. So this brings us to, in 2013, actor Michael Coleman, who plays Happy, one of the Seven Dwarfs, by the way, so irrelevant, literally who, he started beef on Twitter for no reason, literally no reason. Like, so he basically claimed that Swan Queen was never gonna happen, and that the creators and the cast didn't want it to happen. Like, I think that was his first tweet, just being like, he called Swan Queen shippers rude, and then he was like, the cast and crew do not want this to happen. He kept fighting. He like just did like a whole thing on Twitter. He said like, I quote, "I didn't kill your ship as it never had life," end quote. And when he was like replying to people being like, oh, like this ship means a lot because of queer representation, he then like referred to another queer ship, Mulan and Aurora. Bear with, this ship is stupid. Which basically is not a really good example, because Mulan and Aurora, by the point of the scandal, was just hinted and it never ended up being canon. But he's this straight man, unprovoked, is basically telling a bunch of like queer teenagers, why are you complaining about representation? You have a breadcrumb in one episode. That should be enough. And very famously, and I think it's the best quote of his stupid rampage, he defended the creators by saying that like they're doing a great job, like they don't need to change their narrative for Swan Queen. And then he said that if people wanted Emma and Regina together, they should quote unquote pitch a different show to ABC. Which is so stupid. Like that's the whole point of shipping. Like, we don't want a different show. We want the show to reflect us. Anyway, thankfully, God bless, the actors and the creators had to do damage control the next day and very explicitly said that Michael doesn't speak for them. And the main women in the ship that play Emma and Regina very explicitly said, like, I have nothing against Swan Queen. I love my fans and my shippers equally. So, yeah, that made me so mad. That's just, like, a thing that happened.
Michael did not need to do that. He is literally no one.
Yeah, that's the thing as well. Like, it would have been 1,000 times worse if the main actors of the ship did it. But I'm also like, who is this man? Like, why does he care?
Yeah, like, it doesn't affect his job. It doesn't affect, like, his character.
Exactly. Like, it just has homophobic undertones. Like, why were you gonna go to, like, a Twitter war with, like, queer fans that have absolutely nothing to do with you, like with you and your plot and your character? It makes me really mad.
Yeah, and also like shippers, yes, shippers are insistent. Shippers will defend their ship to the ends of the earth, but it's not like they're sending, I don't know, death threats to the creators and the showrunners and the writers, being like, make my ship sail, or else. Like it's just like a bunch of queer teenagers having fun online. Like it's literally not that deep.
Yeah.
In terms of like their ability to be professional about their jobs.
Yeah, and I find it insane that he thought that he was being the white knight for the creators and the cast when he's so peripheral to anything. Like, again, it just has a lot of homophobic undertones and not understanding his own job.
Yeah.
Like, that, like, shipping is what gives you a job, dude.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think people like, yeah, like he definitely forgot that shippers aren't crazy people. They're viewers. They are the people who give you a paycheck.
Yeah. And like just because they're insistent on a panel doesn't mean anything
Yeah.
for your job. Anyway,
Yeah.
very bizarre.
No.
Fuck all that.
Yeah.
But sadly, Michael Coleman was right about one thing. That is that Swan Queen never happened. And like kind of similar to Supernatural, it is just in the DNA of the show that a queer ship was never going to happen. Because like Once Upon a Time is based on fairy tales, which are obviously quite like traditional and heteronormative and sometimes misogynistic. But also, again, it aired on ABC, which is owned by Disney.
Yeah.
So there was no way that the two main characters were gonna be made queer. And like while half of the fandom was queer and probably around half of the fandom shipped Swan Queen, the other half didn't. Like it really wasn't like Supernatural. It like there's as much passion for Swan Queen as there is for the straight ships. What makes me quite sad about this kind of accidental or maybe not queerbaiting is that Emma and Regina started having less screen time together, but also that led to more fans kind of like hyperfixating when they did. Like even in later seasons when they didn't have like immense like involvement in the plot with each other and they were spending way more time with their straight romantic partners, there would still be like one episode where they team up to solve a mystery or help each other, and god, the chemistry was there. And like there's so much of it. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I found Once Upon a Time around when I was 15, 16, when I started understanding my own queer feelings and my own queer identity. So like I just hyper fixated on Swan Queen. I read so much fan fiction. I was part of those edits. I was part of Tumblr. I was also watching it while it was still on air, and I truly believed that they were gonna be together. Like I thought this was it. But what I love the most, and what I think a lot of people love about Swan Queen, is this idea that two women can have a fairy tale ending. That we can kind of join the ranks of like beautiful love stories. But what ended up happening is that we did get some fan servicey queer couples. Like they didn't die, which is great. But basically in the later seasons, obviously the creators realized that there were a lot of queer fans, and we were given some random female queer couples. One of them was like Red Riding Hood with Dorothy, and that was given one episode. And we've never seen Dorothy, by the way.
Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz?
Yes.
Just to clarify. So not a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale?
Yes. No. Good night. This show, by season 3, has like Coco and Frozen, and it just becomes the Disney multiverse.
Except I don't even think The Wizard of Oz is Disney. I think it's just that the copyright expired and they were like, let's fucking go.
Yeah, to be fair, it's because we have a Wicked Witch of the West. Wicked Witch, so I guess...
Because, like, I don't think there is a Disney version of Wizard of Oz. I just think it's an old kind of fairy tale-esque thing now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd actually never thought about that. The Wizard of Oz only became relevant because of the Wicked Witch, and I guess they were like, oh, there's other characters, like the main character. So they made her queer, and they made her like end up with Red Riding Hood, and like it's quite cute. It is very like, it calls back to Snow and Charming, like the main romantic fairy tale-y couple in the show. So it's like, oh, I'll always find you, and true love's kiss. Like it's cute, but it's one episode that almost feels like a Christmas queer special or something. And then in the last season, which to me is like, we've seen it, like it's almost like a spin-off. Like it doesn't really make much sense with the universe. There's another queer, specifically female queer ship between Robin Hood's daughter, who's also named Robin, and Alice from Alice in Wonderland. So yeah, these couples have no chemistry, they have no history, they just kind of exist for representation's sake. And like, I'm glad that Once Upon a Time gave space for that. Like it wasn't completely denying their queer fandom, but it's just very frustrating, specifically because you have such a beautiful interaction and a whack show. Like if you can have a show where Rumpelstiltskin is also the crocodile and is like the grandfather to the son of the evil witch, and the evil witch is like, you know, if you can have a show with such whack dynamics, why couldn't you have a show with two moms and like queer protagonists?
Yeah. If Mother Gothel can transform herself to look like Rapunzel to trick, who was it?
Hook.
To trick Captain Hook into having sex with her so she can give birth to Alice in Wonderland or something. Like, if that can happen, if that can be a whole plot, then why can't you have two moms?
Exactly. Also, by the way, just
why can't you have a blended family?
before anyone comes at us, it's not Hook, it's Wish Hook, because there's two sets of characters, two sets of the same characters. It's some bullshit. But yeah, you can tell the influence of queer shipping. Even if this never happened and Swan Queen will forever live in my brain and nowhere else, it was such a huge part of this that it actually led to some changes in the plot. It led to some drama with the cast, and it led to, you know, Alice and Robin being together, question mark.
Every win is a win for the movement. A win is a win. Yeah. I mean, I think we've just told two tales of
Whoa.
unrequited love, basically.
Yes!
Like it's just like been this thing that we both loved for so long and through so much, through so many stupid plots.
Yeah.
And we still didn't get the one thing that we wanted, which is not much to ask for, clearly. But, like, not to be cheesy or anything, but it really is about the journey. Like, shipping was such a big part of these experiences, and it was what made them so special. And let's not deny the power of shipping, like the power of the visibility of these specific queer ships. If shipping is about giving some of the narrative power to the viewer, to the audience, even if we are queer-baited into watching 15 seasons of these shows, or if the writing completely erases us as the story crashes and burns, these ships still exist, and the communities that were created because of these ships are still present and have, you know, like people have genuinely made friends, have found their significant others, have, you know, they created really important and meaningful connections through these ships, these fandoms. I think the beauty about shipping is that despite them being based on a book, a movie, a TV show, or whatever it is, they are not defined by them. Like, shipping is its own thing. It's its own community. It doesn't have to involve the creators, the actors, or anything. It is purely the reader's interpretation and their love for this thing that fuels shipping. And if that isn't Roland Barthes' dream, I don't know what is. Yeah. Actually, I don't know. He probably was a homophobe, but
who knows?
But who knows? The point is, in Once Upon a Time, Supernatural, shipping clearly dictated the course of these shows in some way or another. It wasn't the ending that we wanted, but it wasn't the ending that the creators wanted either, I don't think.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, you can see this kind of like relationship between shipper and showrunner and writer and reader that is kind of fueled by the passion of shippers, which is like a good way to talk about why we care so much. Like, why are we here in 2024 after we have spent years without seeing an episode of any of these shows, still talking about them and how they affected us?
And let's also be completely real. And whenever I go back to Supernatural anyway, I watch the episodes in which Castiel is there interacting with Dean. They are my favorite episodes, and they forever will be.
Yeah, like, I exclusively rewatch season 1, where Regina is at her hottest, at her meanest, and there's no man in between her and Emma. So yeah, the point is, we really care. We still do. And that is like shown through Shipping Wars, which is probably how a lot of people have heard of shipping. It's very infamous. Again, this animosity between the fans, but also even like Team Jacob and Team Edward is like a very famous quote unquote shipping war. It was very memeable, but it was exactly that. It's like that space where like you're not sure how the story is gonna go, so you like are kind of fighting with people who think the opposite. Shipping wars are these great display of the intense emotions and intellectual debates at play when shipping. It's not only about what couple we think would be cute together. Like, I think it really, really goes beyond that, as we have spent 20 minutes each talking about our fandoms. Shipping wars are deeply personal. They're like takes on a piece of work that makes fans argue against or for theories, defend their textual examples, and even like reveals their own like interpersonal psychology. I think like the fans.
Yeah.
Like most wars, I think it's about being right.
And I think that is why we're separating shipping from fanfiction.
Yes.
Because shipping really is an argument for canonicity. I don't know if that makes sense, but shipping is about being right. You're right. Like, that is exactly what it is, because it's about gathering evidence. It's about reading and rereading these works. It's really intellectual as opposed to fan fiction, which is more sort of general what ifs. Like, that's not necessarily an intellectual debate. It's not like the author of the fan fiction is saying that they're right, that this is the way the story should have gone or whatever. Shipping, however, is. When you say you ship two people, you're like, these two people should end up together. And that is the hill I will die on. And if that isn't literary criticism, I don't know what is. Like, these sort of intellectual debates, gathering evidence from the text, and, I don't know, inferring, like, psychology and social studies or whatever, and imposing them on these fictional stories to, like, make more sense of them, to, like, make them come to life more in the favor of the reality that you see this existing in. But I'm going to bring back theory into this discussion and discuss the concept of the reader-author, which is basically the idea that the reader, even as a sort of quote-unquote passive audience member, will put their own ideas, identities, feelings into the text that they're reading. They will project to some extent. They will interpret based on their own identity, which is what shipping is. Like, you know, you put your identity, you project your identity onto whatever you are arguing for online. You make it your own. You claim it as part of yourself. You are Team Jacob. You are Team Edward. You are this thing. So it's like deeply personal and deeply intellectual, and that is why we're intellectualizing it via literary theory, because it is just literary criticism. Except we're debating about things that were made in the last 10 years instead of things that were made in the last 500.
Exactly. I also wanted to say, I know it sounds slightly contradictory that we say, like, oh, it's about the journey, it's about the communities, shipping is about the friends we made along the way, and shipping is also all about being right and being canon. And I think that's kind of the complexity of shipping, that it is about the communities and it is about the act of shipping, but it's always striving towards something because it's so emotional. It's not the general idea of fandom that just kind of creates community around a work and doesn't necessarily have an agenda. Shipping is about that agenda, and that's why it leads to beautiful communities, because it leads to like queer communities or people who kind of have the same preferences. Like, as you said, like a lot of people who've met their significant others through shipping is also because they had the same kind of romantic preferences in a way, which is shown because they ship the same ship. I hope that makes sense. So like, as you said, like when the reader author or the shipper kind of has a say into what couple or what like storyline should be canon, they are claiming the work as part of themselves, and they're putting part of themselves into the work. So shipping is deeply personal and speaks volumes about the shippers themselves. In a fandom, like the website article titled The Sweet Science of Shipping, Maggie Owens interviewed clinical psychologist Dr. Lynn Subernis, and Dr. Subernis writes that shipping is, quote, all about identity exploration. We are all going around looking for depictions of our own romantic, sexual, and emotional fantasies. Shipping is self-narrative therapy, end quote. So yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Like, if I generally made friends online in the other side of the world, and I thought I had romantic feelings towards them because we were both like Swan Queen shippers. I kid you not, there were Tumblr posts where people were like, I am an Emma looking for my Regina, and I am a Regina looking for my Emma. Because it's more than like, oh, I like this two people. It's like, I am the type of person who's looking for this type of person, and I am the type of person who really wants this type of relationship, this type of chemistry, this type of power dynamic. It is about exploring our romantic, sexual, and emotional fantasies, as Dr. Subernis says. So when we ship, we're inserting our own desires and our own ideals about relationships into these fictional characters. It is a way of exploring our fantasies in couples we ship, we can trace some of our own preferences when it comes to personalities, power structures, appearances, like of these potential romantic partners or our own potential romantic partners. So it doesn't mean shippers end up with people who necessarily resemble the fictional characters we ship. Swan Queen is an example in my case, where like I am a queer woman who was shipping a queer female ship, but I don't think you necessarily are like looking for a Dean or a Castiel. You just like that. You just liked whatever dynamic. It somehow resonated with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was very much Castiel was a very... Okay, this is so weird because he's an angel of the Lord. And, like, as soon as you start thinking about that, you're just like, Jesus Christ, I'm so weird. But genuinely, I think the reason why a lot of people like the character of Castiel, even though he was, let's be real, barely a character for, like, the first 3 seasons he was in. He didn't appear till season 4, and he still made his way into the hearts of everyone. Is that he was just, like, a really awkward, lost soul. Like, he grew up with an absent father, God, and he wasn't sure what to believe in anymore because he hadn't heard from his dad in a while, and he thought his whole mission was to, forward the message of the Lord, but the Lord wasn't there. That is his vibe. And also, he's gay.
He's a lost soul who hadn't heard from his father, God, in a while. I love that. And yeah, that's like a trope, but that's also like a preference. Like, again, that's power dynamics, that's like daddy issues, or even like, I like broken people. Like, as much as those are memes, either be like in the realm of fantasy, like you're not necessarily dating someone with daddy issues, or in the realm of like legit, I'm looking for one, To me, shipping like that is like porn for romantic attraction. Like, it's a place where you can explore, and it doesn't mean you are gonna do the thing, or you're gonna end up with the thing you are like curious about, or the thing you watch, or the thing you like lean into. But it really does say something about you, and it's like a place where you can explore things in the abstract and extrapolate what you actually want in real life.
Absolutely.
And like, this is never more obvious than like queer and POC shippers who like insert our own attraction and marginalized identities into the couples we wish were together. Yes, it's also about daddy issues and like broken as a preference or whatever, or like as a fantasy, but it's also about like, I wish I was loved this way by another woman, or I wish I was loved this way by someone of my own race or another race that like saw me as like a valuable person. Like, it's so personal. So when like our ships are mocked, or they're not realized, like they're not fulfilled, we take it personally, even if it's like by creators or by other fans, because subconsciously we feel like our own real life identities or preferences or fantasies, or even our own flesh and blood relationships, are being shut down as well. And this is why we go to war for our ships.
Yeah. And I also think it works the other way, in that shipping is very much imposed visibility for marginalized communities. Because, I mean, let's be real, even nowadays, but that's definitely not 15, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago even, there weren't a lot of POC or queer people on like the TV shows we were watching. There wasn't a lot of POC or queer representation in the media landscape. I think it's very natural for people to identify with or project onto the things that they love. So obviously the queer and POC watchers, mostly the queer, I guess, in this case, would project their own identities on the things that they love in the same way that straight and white people will. Like, that's just kind of what people are searching for when we request representation. It's just seeing yourself reflected. But if you don't see yourself directly reflected, you're just gonna, you will relate to it in the way that you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if you don't see yourself reflected, but you still like something, you make it happen through shipping, and you claim that power and you claim that visibility. And like, again, it is this almost contradictory thing where we're saying it's really important to be canon, and it isn't important to be canon. But in a way, no matter what, even if we still strive towards canonicity, and we are now striving towards like meaningful representation, we still, in these ships, imposed ourselves by shipping. They changed the fandom, the history, the interpretation of the show, in a way or another. So yeah, like, kind of bringing it back to that and queerbaiting. In an essay called Queerbaiting, the Playful Possibilities of Homoeroticism, Joseph Brennan argues that, in reference to another queer ship, Merlin, which we could obviously do like another episode about, is same bullshit, that was also never canon.
I love Merlin so much. We might have to talk about this some other time.
Yes.
But yes. Anyway, sorry.
No, please. Like, it's again another very famous queer and queer-baited ship that was never canon. So in reference to that, Joseph Brennan argues that, quote, slash and queer readings of mainstream text posit a radical revision of the canon narrative, end quote. So again, is what we're saying. These queer readings in big TV shows and big networks are radical, they're important, and they change the canon in a way. They revise it.
So in reference to Merlin specifically, but I do think applies to Once Upon a Time as well. The queer ship in Merlin is Merlin and Arthur, which obviously are two like classical figures, like they are from medieval literature. So, you know, imposing that queer visibility on medieval literature as well. And I think in Once Upon a Time, it's like, why couldn't Snow White? Why couldn't the evil queen be gay?
Yeah, you're right. It is imposing our own visibility in also quite meaningful canon things outside of these shows, like culturally important things for the canon.
Which, isn't that just queer theory in academia? Just to round off this whole thing, we're trying to put this literary theory on shipping, which is very sort of contemporary and pop culture-y activity. But shipping is just literary criticism because the attention to detail in shipping, you know, people read and reread these texts or watch these shows like frame by frame and pick them apart word for word, touch by touch. How is that not academic rigor? And on top of that, what is queer theory and like what is queer academia in literature anyway, if not just reading something as queer? Like the trend of sort of Shakespeare being read in queer ways is just sort of saying, what if Shakespeare was gay? Or what if this one character is meant to be gay? It's not based on anything groundbreaking per se. It's based on just an idea. What if this imagination that something could be queer just because it hasn't been read that way before? So what if we try it? Queer theory in literature is just challenging heteronormativity and cisgender experiences being the norm in these works of classic literature. And shippers defend and celebrate their own queerness by reading and writing themselves into their favorite shows, despite the heteronormative and cisnormative showrunners.
It's the same thing.
It's all academia.
Yeah, shippers are writers. They're academics. What is the difference between the Royal Shakespeare Company coming up with an article about maybe Shakespeare was queer every 5 years and we coming up with a Tumblr post about maybe Merlin was queer? It's the same thing, and it shows a deep academic curiosity and commitment. And to kind of bring it back to one of our case studies, I love that outside of how frustrating Once Upon a Time was sometimes when it came to Swan Queen and queerbaiting, I was looking at an interview with the creators, Adam Horowitz and Edward Kitsis, and when they were asked about shipping and like if they thought like Swan Queen was going to be canon or Captain Swan or whatever, they said, and I quote, "Subtext is one of the amazing ways that shows can take on a life of their own. All we can do is create stories and characters, but once it's out there, it's up to the audience to consume as they will," end quote. The authors are dying. The authors are aware of that. They're aware that their power only reaches up to a point, and then the academic community or the fandom will take it from there.
Yeah. Barthes spoke about the author god, which is this sort of omniscient authority over the text in his essay, and death of the author is basically saying death to the author god, because the author, yes, they wrote the thing, they did create it, but their authority is lost as soon as someone reads it. There is no god, there is only the reader.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, The Gifted Child Symposium. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on right now. It would really help us out. Also, please share us with your friends, family, and enemies. You can find us on Instagram at giftedcs.pod. We would love to hear from you.
So I know we said in the beginning of the episode that we weren't going to talk about shipping real people. And that's because I just think it's a very different conversation and it would have been entirely irrelevant to what we've been talking about. And also, I personally wouldn't be able to talk about it in a non-judgmental way.
Yes. I feel like shippers get a bad rep because of being like obsessive and stuff, and like we're insane, but I think there is a sort of like divide of like we are weird but we're not as weird as the people speculating on real people, so
Yeah.
I think that's where the judgment comes of like a little bit pick me of like, oh, I swear I'm like concerning, but only with fictional people who will not be affected by my opinions.
Yeah. I think especially in relation to what we've been talking about, like Barthes and literary criticism and the death of the author, shipping real people feels a little too close to like playing God. Because if like
I like that.
death of the author is like, you know, rewriting narratives, like you're inserting your own readership, your own identity into the thing you're reading. Applying that logic and applying that sort of like instinct and urge to real life, so like, I don't know, Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson, if you're like, that is like the narrative, that is my reading of the world, it's giving delusion.
Have you seen that meme of like pure delusion was when I was 13 and I shaved my whole pussy to be in like the nosebleeders at a One Direction concert?
Yeah, no, that's the thing, right? So I know like shipping real people is like a thing, you know, Larry Stylinston and like Taylor Swift and Karlie Kloss, like that was like a pretty big thing when they were like best friends or whatever. Everyone was like, oh my god, they're actually secretly gay and in love. But the other flip side, like the other side of like real life people, celebrity shipping, is the whole your name thing, like the Y/N fan fictions where your mom sells you to become One Direction sex slave or like whatever. You know what I mean?
It is what we talked about, but so much more literally.
Yeah.
Because it is not like, oh, I'm seeing my preferences into this character and I'm seeing a model of my relationship. Is so like specific to like literally I just want to be with this person. But it still is, and I think that's very interesting, that you are creating, you're like myth creating. You know how like, do we know that Benedict Cumberbatch is smart, or does he just play a bunch of smart people? And when you do your name Benedict Cumberbatch fan fiction, in a way you're still writing to Sherlock, you're still writing to Alan Turing. You know what I mean? Like it still is creating a character. And it's the same with Harry Styles. Like he's always like sassy and British, and we are just kind of creating characters out of interviews and snippets. So it still is I think it still is like writing. And I think we all kind of do it. We all kind of pretend that these people are like a certain way based on the close reading of an interview.
I mean, that's just parasocial relationships.
Yeah, exactly. It's reading. It's close reading. It's fan fiction of real life. And I think we need to discuss that in like a fan fiction episode.
Yeah.
You know, our fan fiction episode's coming, guys. Anything is fan fiction, if you kind of see it like that. Like any conjecture, any theory, like is a fan theory. So when do fan theories and then fan stories collide more than in your name fan fiction?